California has been selling the dream so successfully for so long that the rest of the country forgot to ask what the dream cost. This is a state built on stolen land, constructed by exploited labor, and periodically reminded by its own geology that nothing here was ever as permanent as the architecture suggested. From a genocide conducted in the open air of the Gold Rush foothills to a wildfire that erased an entire town in a single morning, California has been accumulating catastrophes at the same scale it accumulates everything else. These are 25 tragedies the Golden State has been carrying beneath the sunshine. Number 25. Spanish missions destroyed native California completely. When the Spanish mission system established its first California outpost at San Diego in 1769, an estimated 300,000 native Californians lived across the state in hundreds of distinct tribal communities, with languages, trade systems, and land management practices developed over thousands of years. The missions concentrated native populations into enclosed settlements, destroyed traditional food systems, imposed forced labor, and introduced European diseases against which native Californians had no immunity, producing death rates in some missions exceeding 90% of the converted population within a generation. The mission system collapsed in 1833, but the damage to California's native population was permanent. The civilization the missions dismantled had taken millennia to develop and was gone within decades of the first ship's arrival. Number 24. Gold Rush miners committed open genocide in the foothills. The California Gold Rush of 1848 reduced the state's native population from an estimated 150,000 to approximately 30,000 within 2 decades through a combination of massacre, starvation, disease, and a state-sponsored bounty system that paid militia members for native scalps and severed heads. Governor Peter Burnett addressed the California legislature in 1851 and stated explicitly that a war of extermination would continue until the Indian race became extinct, language that historians have identified as one of the clearest articulations of genocidal intent by an American elected official on record. The California genocide is documented in state archives, in the congressional records authorizing the militia payments, and in the demographic collapse of a population that the state of California formally acknowledged as genocide in 2019, 170 years after it began. Number 23. The Donner Party's winter became an American horror story. In October 1846, the Donner Reed wagon party of 87 immigrants bound for California became snowbound in the Sierra Nevada near present-day Truckee when an early winter closed the mountain passes before they could cross, trapping the group at elevations above 7,000 feet without adequate food or shelter as temperatures dropped and the snow accumulated beyond anything the party's leaders had prepared for. 42 of the 87 members died over the winter, and the survivors kept themselves alive through methods that the rescue parties who arrived in February 1847 documented, and that American popular memory has never released. The Donner Party has been analyzed as a story of poor leadership, bad luck, and human extremity. It is also a straightforward account of what the Sierra Nevada does to people who underestimate it. Number 22. Los Angeles massacred its Chinese residents in 1871. On the night of October 24, 1871, a white mob of approximately 500 people descended on the Chinese quarter of Los Angeles, a community of fewer than 200 people, and killed at least 17 Chinese residents by hanging, shooting, and stabbing in what remains one of the largest mass lynchings in American history. The mob looted Chinese-owned businesses while the killing proceeded. 8 men were convicted of manslaughter in trials that produced sentences quickly overturned on procedural grounds. The Chinese massacre of 1871 occurred in a city with a population of approximately 5,000 people, meaning a significant fraction of Los Angeles's residents participated in or witnessed the killing. The event is rarely included in the Los Angeles origin story the city has preferred to tell about itself. Number 21. The 1918 flu devastated California's cities in weeks. The influenza pandemic of 1918 struck California's major cities with a force that overwhelmed every available medical resource, killing an estimated 19,000 Californians between the fall of 1918 and the spring of 1919 in waves that filled hospitals past capacity and required churches, schools, and civic buildings to be converted into emergency wards. San Francisco imposed an ordinance requiring face masks in public, one of the first mask mandates in American history, and prosecuted violators. Los Angeles and San Francisco competed over which city had responded more effectively to a pandemic whose second wave killed more people than the first. California's 1918 death toll included thousands of young adults in the prime of their lives, which is the specific demographic signature of that particular influenza strain, and the detail that made it uniquely devastating to families and communities depending on that generation. Number 20. The St. Francis Dam failure killed 400 people overnight. On March 12, 1928, the St. Francis Dam north of Los Angeles, designed and personally inspected days earlier by William Mulholland, the engineer who had built Los Angeles's water system and staked his reputation on its safety, failed catastrophically at midnight, releasing 12.4 billion gallons of water that moved through the Santa Clara River Valley at 18 miles per hour, killing an estimated 400 people and destroying everything in the flood's path before reaching the Pacific Ocean 5.5 hours later. Mulholland accepted public responsibility at the inquest and testified that if there was an error of judgment, it was his. His career ended with the disaster, and he spent his final years in increasing isolation. The St. Francis Dam failure remains the second deadliest disaster in California history, behind only the 1906 earthquake and the worst American civil engineering failure of the 20th century. Before we continue, if California's history of hidden catastrophe is landing harder than the postcard suggested, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. It helps us keep uncovering the stories every state has been carrying beneath the surface. Number 19. The Long Beach earthquake leveled a California city. On March 10, 1933, a magnitude 6.4 earthquake struck Long Beach at 5:54 in the afternoon, killing 115 people and destroying or severely damaging thousands of buildings across a city that had been constructed without seismic standards governing the quality of materials or the design of structures. The most catastrophic building failures occurred in school buildings, many of which collapsed entirely, and the timing of the quake at late afternoon on a school day, after students had been dismissed, prevented a death toll among children that would have been catastrophic. The Long Beach earthquake directly produced California's Field Act of 1933, mandating seismic standards for school construction, which is the single most important piece of earthquake safety legislation in California history, and was written in direct response to the school buildings that would have killed thousands of children 3 hours earlier. Number 18. Dust Bowl migrants were turned away at California's border. Between 1935 and 1940, approximately 300,000 migrants from Oklahoma, Texas, Arkansas, and surrounding Dust Bowl states arrived in California seeking agricultural work, and the state responded with a combination of institutional hostility, vigilante violence, and explicit policy designed to prevent their entry. The Los Angeles Police Department deployed officers to the Arizona and Oregon borders to turn back migrants in an operation that had no legal authority and no apparent awareness of the constitutional problems with a state police force blockading American citizens from entering another state. The labor camps that housed those who made it through the informal blockade were documented by photographers, described by John Steinbeck, and investigated by congressional committees in a record of institutional cruelty toward American citizens whose only offense was arriving at a destination that had advertised itself as a place people were welcome to go. Number 17. Manzanar imprisoned Japanese Americans in the desert. Beginning in March 1942, following Executive Order 9066, approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans were forced from their homes on the West Coast and transported to internment camps, with Manzanar in the Owens Valley of California becoming the most documented of the 10 facilities, housing up to 10,000 people in barracks on a high desert plain where temperatures reached 110 degrees in summer and dropped below freezing in winter, surrounded by guard towers and barbed wire. The people imprisoned at Manzanar were American citizens or legal residents who had committed no offense. The Supreme Court upheld the internment in Korematsu versus United States, a decision formally repudiated by the court in 2018. A formal apology and $20,000 per surviving internee arrived in 1988, 46 years after the camps opened, in the same inadequate arithmetic that federal apologies for mass civil rights violations consistently produce. Number 16. The Zoot Suit riots were state-sanctioned racial violence. Over 10 days in June 1943, thousands of U.S. servicemen stationed in and around Los Angeles attacked Mexican-American and Black residents in what is known as the Zoot Suit riots, beating civilians, stripping them of their clothing in the streets, and moving through neighborhoods, while Los Angeles police followed behind, arresting the victims rather than the attackers. The Los Angeles press covered the events as a crackdown on juvenile delinquency. A formal investigation by a citizens committee concluded that the riots were the product of racial discrimination embedded in Los Angeles's institutions, a finding that the Los Angeles Times did not headline and that city officials did not act on. The servicemen involved faced no military discipline. The Mexican-American residents who were attacked were in many cases American citizens defending their right to exist in the city where they had been born. Number 15. The Watts Uprising exposed Los Angeles' racial divide. Over 6 days in August 1965, the Watts neighborhood of Los Angeles erupted in the most destructive urban uprising in American history to that point, triggered by a traffic stop that escalated into a confrontation between police and residents in a neighborhood that had been subjected to documented police brutality, systematic housing discrimination, and economic isolation maintained by public policy for decades. 34 people died, more than 1,000 were injured, and approximately $40 million in property was damaged or destroyed. The McCone Commission investigation that followed identified poverty, inadequate schools, unemployment, and police misconduct as root causes with the accuracy of a diagnosis that produced no treatment. The conditions the Commission documented in 1965 in Watts were still present in the same communities when Los Angeles burned again in 1992. Number 14. The Santa Barbara oil spill launched the environmental movement. On January 28, 1969, a blowout at a Union Oil platform 6 miles off the Santa Barbara coast released an estimated 3 million gallons of crude oil into the Santa Barbara Channel, coating approximately 35 miles of coastline with oil that killed thousands of seabirds, marine mammals, and fish in a disaster photographed extensively enough to produce images that circulated nationally for weeks. The Santa Barbara spill's visual scale, the oil-covered pelicans, the dead dolphins on the beach, created the public outrage that drove the first Earth Day in April 1970, the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency in December 1970, and the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act that followed. One of the most consequential pieces of environmental legislation in American history was written in direct response to what washed up on a California beach. Number 13. The Sylmar earthquake collapsed a veterans hospital. On February 9, 1971, a magnitude 6.6 earthquake struck the San Fernando Valley at 6 a.m., killing 65 people and causing damage exceeding $500 million across the Los Angeles region, with the single most catastrophic loss occurring at the Sylmar Veterans Administration Hospital, where 2 buildings collapsed entirely, killing 49 patients. The VA hospital had been built before seismic codes required the design standards that might have kept its buildings standing, in a pattern the Long Beach earthquake of 1933 had established and the Field Act had addressed for schools, but not for the broader building stock of the country's most seismically active major metropolitan area. The 1971 earthquake produced California's comprehensive seismic safety legislation, the Alquist-Priolo Earthquake Fault Zone Act, restricting construction directly on known fault lines, passed in direct response to what Sylmar demonstrated about what existing construction standards had permitted. Number 12. Loma Prieta struck during the World Series in 1989. On October 17, 1989, a magnitude 6.9 earthquake struck the Santa Cruz Mountains 60 miles south of San Francisco at 5:04 p.m. During the pregame broadcast of the World Series, producing 15 seconds of shaking that collapsed a section of the Bay Bridge, brought down the double-decker Cypress Structure Freeway in Oakland, crushing 42 people in their cars, and killed 63 people across the region while injuring nearly 4,000. The earthquake struck at a moment when millions of people were simultaneously watching television in an unplanned demonstration of real-time disaster broadcasting. The Cypress structure collapse, in which 42 people died within seconds in a freeway designed to the best available 1950s seismic standards, produced the most concentrated single-structure death toll of the event, and the most consequential re-examination of California's elevated freeway infrastructure, many of which were subsequently demolished rather than retrofitted. Number 11. The Oakland Hills fire destroyed a neighborhood in hours. On October 20, 1991, a firestorm driven by Diablo winds swept through the Oakland and Berkeley Hills, killing 25 people, destroying 3,354 homes and 456 apartments, and displacing approximately 25,000 residents in a fire that moved fast enough in the early hours to trap people in their cars on narrow canyon roads that the density of hillside development had made into one-way corridors with nowhere to go when the exits closed. The fire burned through neighborhoods built in one of the highest-value residential real estate markets in the country, in a fire-prone landscape where the dense development of the previous decades had created fuel conditions in the ornamental plantings, wooden homes, and cedar shake roofs of canyon communities that fire behavior experts had been warning about for years before the warning became irrelevant because the fire had already started. Number 10. Los Angeles burned for 6 days after Rodney King. On April 29, 1992, the acquittal of 4 Los Angeles police officers who had been videotaped beating Rodney King for 81 seconds on a roadside in Lakeview Terrace triggered 6 days of uprising that killed 63 people, injured more than 2,000, and caused approximately $1 billion in property damage across Los Angeles, the most destructive urban uprising in American history. The video of the King beating had been broadcast nationally for months before the trial, and the acquittal arrived as a verdict not just on the 4 officers, but on the credibility of what the tape had shown. Korean-owned businesses in South Los Angeles sustained a disproportionate share of the destruction in a neighborhood where Korean immigrant entrepreneurship and Black residential community occupied the same geography in a tension that the uprising made catastrophically visible. Los Angeles has been processing the week of April 29th ever since, without arriving at a resolution that fully accounts for what the burning exposed. Number 9. Northridge woke Los Angeles before dawn in 1994. On January 17, 1994, at 4:31 a.m., a magnitude 6.7 earthquake struck beneath the San Fernando Valley, killing 57 people, collapsing freeway interchanges, destroying parking structures, and causing an estimated $20 billion in damage, the costliest earthquake in American history at the time. Several of the freeway structures that failed had been retrofitted after the 1971 Sylmar earthquake, raising questions about whether the retrofits had been adequate that engineers spent the following years answering. The Northridge earthquake struck a metropolitan area of 15 million people at 4:31 in the morning, which almost certainly prevented a death toll an order of magnitude larger. The interchanges that collapsed in the early morning would have held thousands of commuters 3 hours later. Los Angeles spent $5 billion rebuilding its freeway infrastructure afterward, with seismic standards updated by what Northridge had broken. Number 8. The Cedar Fire became California's worst on record. In October 2003, a hunter lost in the Cleveland National Forest in San Diego County lit a signal fire that grew into the Cedar Fire, driven by Santa Ana winds exceeding 70 miles per hour across chaparral that had not burned in decades, killing 15 people, destroying 2,232 homes, and burning 280,000 acres in what was then the largest wildfire in California history. The Cedar Fire was one of 15 fires burning simultaneously across Southern California during the same October week, in a fire siege that killed 22 people total and destroyed thousands of structures in the most destructive fire event California had recorded. The record the Cedar Fire set in 2003 was broken multiple times in the following 2 decades by fires that burned in the same drought and wind conditions, through the same accumulated fuel loads, and with the same speed that had always been available in the Southern California fire climate, and that development had continued to expand into regardless. Number 7. Oroville Dam nearly failed with millions downstream. In February 2017, erosion damage to the main spillway of the Oroville Dam in Butte County, the tallest dam in the United States, forced emergency managers to use the emergency spillway for the first time in the dam's 50-year history. And when the emergency spillway began eroding as well, approximately 188,000 people in the communities downstream were ordered to evacuate in one of the largest emergency evacuations in California history. The dam did not fail. The evacuation order was lifted after engineers stabilized the situation, and the main spillway was rebuilt at a cost of approximately $1.1 billion. Post-incident investigation found that the erosion damage resulted from a design deficiency that had been identified by engineers during the dam's licensing process in 2005 and rejected by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a finding that confirmed the Oroville near miss as a preventable institutional failure rather than an unforeseeable natural event. Number 6. Thomas Fire and mudslides erased Montecito together. In December 2017, the Thomas Fire burned 281,893 acres across Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, the largest wildfire in California history at that point, stripping the hillsides above Montecito of vegetation and leaving the soil with nothing to hold it when rain arrived. On January 9, 2018, a fast-moving debris flow swept through Montecito in the early morning darkness, killing 23 people and destroying more than 100 homes in a disaster that came 3 weeks after the fire had been largely contained, and the evacuation orders for many areas had been lifted. The Thomas Fire and the Montecito mudslides were not two disasters. They were one disaster in 2 acts, the second made possible entirely by the first. Several of the people killed in the mudslide had returned to their homes after the fire evacuation was lifted, in what anyone would have considered a reasonable decision to make. Number 5. The Camp Fire erased the town of Paradise. On November 8, 2018, the Camp Fire ignited near Pulga in Butte County, and within hours had become the most destructive and deadliest wildfire in California history, killing 85 people, destroying 18,804 structures and burning 153,336 acres while eliminating the town of Paradise, population 26,000, in a fire that moved faster than many residents could drive away from it. The traffic leaving Paradise on Skyway and other canyon roads gridlocked as fire closed in from multiple directions, and some residents abandoned their cars and ran. Paradise had created a wildfire evacuation plan. The fire moved faster than the plan assumed it could. Pacific Gas and Electric subsequently pled guilty to 84 counts of involuntary manslaughter for the deaths caused by the electrical transmission line failure that ignited the fire and agreed to pay $13.5 billion in settlements, a sum that represents the largest utility criminal settlement in American history, and that did not bring anyone back. Number 4. The 2020 wildfire season broke every California record. The 2020 California wildfire season burned more than 4 million acres, the first time in recorded history that California had burned 4 million acres in a single year, producing the 5 largest fires in state history simultaneously, filling the skies of the San Francisco Bay Area with smoke so thick on September 9th that the midday sky turned orange and streetlights activated at noon across the region. The Creek Fire in Fresno and Madera counties trapped approximately 200 people in the Mammoth Pool Reservoir area, requiring a National Guard helicopter rescue operation conducted through heavy smoke and darkness. The August Complex Fire in the Mendocino National Forest became the first California fire to exceed 1 million acres on its own. The 2020 season arrived with the particular force of a record that had been predicted by climate scientists for years, and that the year's drought and heat conditions converted from prediction to reality. Number 3. The Dixie Fire became California's largest single fire. In the summer of 2021, the Dixie Fire ignited in Plumas County and burned for nearly 3 months across 963,309 acres, the largest single fire in California history, burning through national forest, private timberland, and communities including the town of Greenville, which was largely destroyed in August. The Dixie Fire burned through terrain shaped by the 2018 Camp Fire, the 2020 North Complex Fire, and decades of fire suppression policy that had accumulated fuel loads in the northern Sierra Nevada that the fire consumed with the efficiency of a landscape that had been preparing to burn for years. PG&E equipment was identified as the probable cause, continuing the pattern established by the utilities' role in the Camp Fire and raising questions about whether the electrical infrastructure serving California's most fire-prone terrain was reconcilable with the fire climate those communities now occupied. Number 2. Atmospheric rivers drowned California's drought in 2023. Between December 2022 and March 2023, a succession of atmospheric river storms struck California in the most concentrated sequence of major precipitation events in the state's recorded history, delivering more water to the state in 3 months than the previous 3 years of drought had withheld, killing at least 22 people, causing an estimated $30 billion in damage, flooding agricultural land across the Central Valley, cutting off communities in the Santa Cruz Mountains for weeks, and filling reservoirs from near empty to capacity while simultaneously overwhelming the flood control infrastructure built for a precipitation pattern that the atmospheric rivers exceeded in days. The storms ended one drought and created a new category of disaster, demonstrating that California's water infrastructure, designed to manage scarcity, was equally inadequate for the abundance that climate volatility delivers as the other side of the same coin that drought represents. Number 1. California's disasters are as large as the state itself. The most defining fact about disaster in California is the scale. The way the same size that makes California the most populated, most productive, and most consequential state in the country also makes its catastrophes larger than other states' catastrophes in the same arithmetic. The genocide that cleared California for the gold rush killed more people than most colonial atrocities in American history and is taught in fewer classrooms than its scale requires. The Camp Fire killed 85 people and eliminated a city of 26,000 in a single morning. The 2020 fire season burned 4 million acres, while the state watched its skies turn orange at noon. California has been the place where American ambition runs to its logical conclusion, in its wealth, in its innovation, in its cultural output, and in its disasters. And the disasters are as large as the ambition that keeps arriving here, convinced, despite everything, that this particular edge of the continent is worth the terms it charges. Now that you know these 25 tragedies and natural disasters that have shaped California, now tell us which one surprised you the most. Drop it in the comments, and let's keep uncovering the hidden history of every American state together. Let me know which state I should cover next. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.